Amidst the blood-drenched 16th century, the Mediterranean writhed as a sleepless battlefield where Salih Reis inscribed a terrifying new maritime law across the trembling thrones of Europe. Far surpassing a mere audacious raider, Salih Reis embodied the organized Western vanguard of the Ottoman Leviathan, seizing the supreme title of Bey of Algiers in 1552. Forged in the ancient crucible of Alexandria, he absorbed the unforgiving oceanic doctrines under Hayreddin Barbarossa, graduating from a legendary academy that birthed relentless Islamic naval warlords. Emerging as the most formidable successor to Barbarossa's Algerian armada, he grasped the sovereign banner in 1546, bearing the agonizing, crushing weight of a sprawling maritime empire. His dark epoch witnessed a brutal strategic metamorphosis where naval clashes transcended mere plundering raids, evolving into a methodical war of attrition, severing Europe's vital economic arteries. Beneath his iron-fisted dominion, the Algerian fleet achieved terrifying organizational supremacy, commanding over 1,500 ruthless corsairs and 73 warships prowling from Algiers toward distant Tripoli shores. Spaniards whispered his name in terror as Salih Reis, while desperate dispatches flooding Charles V's court painted him as an unquenchable wolf, ravaging Andalusian and Balearic coastlines. Upon ascending to sovereign command, he inherited not merely vessels of wood and iron, but a shadowy naval doctrine, weaponizing blistering speed, sudden ambush, and tactical evasion. His foremost monumental triumph materialized in 1547, plunging a massive Genoese armada into the abyss near Bejaia and capturing 25 galleons bursting with stolen New World gold. This agonizing blow forged his golden strategic axiom: shatter their lifeblood supply chains, and the mighty fortresses shall crumble into dust, a doctrine modern naval empires revere. Wielding unyielding administrative mastery, he brutally restructured the three gargantuan strongholds of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli into a single, terrifying logistical behemoth rather than squabbling divided fiefdoms. Under his draconian gaze blossomed the infamous Taifa of corsairs, an ironclad military brotherhood orchestrating hundreds of licensed warlords, rigorously dictating ruthless missions and meticulously distributing spoils. This dark order transcended mere personal fealty, enforcing a draconian maritime law that ruthlessly calculated every pirate's exact bloody share, from apex captains to miserable chained oarsmen. Setting himself apart from savage contemporaries, he proved a lethally cunning diplomat, orchestrating a calculated Venetian truce while relentlessly expanding his shadowy dominion toward unforgiving Atlantic frontiers. His subordinates spoke of his topographical memory with mystical terror, believing he possessed an abyssal knowledge of every treacherous inlet and jagged shoreline spanning Gibraltar to Tripoli. Contemporary Spanish chronicler Diego de Haedo branded him infinitely deadlier than Barbarossa, recognizing that while his predecessor unleashed armies, Salih Reis unleashed a horrifyingly precise, unstoppable system. During the bloody campaign of 1555, he orchestrated a terrifyingly synchronized amphibious onslaught, violently ripping the fortress of Bejaia from Spanish subjugation through masterfully executed naval encirclements. Throughout those blood-stained decades bridging 1530 and 1560, the Mediterranean transformed into an apocalyptic theater of existential annihilation, pitting the Ottoman Leviathan against the colossal Habsburg dominion. The imperious Spaniards commanded heavily fortified enclaves stretching across the bleeding African coastline, forging an impenetrable iron chain meticulously engineered to suffocate the resilient Islamic Naval Crescent. Countering this suffocating Spanish iron wall, the Rais vanguard mobilized the devastating might of twin empires, utilizing Algiers as their vanguard, while Istanbul provided impenetrable absolute sanctuary. At the zenith of his devastating supremacy, Salah's fleet deployed 12 colossal galleons and 54 war galleys, bolstered by hundreds of stealthy raiders lurking within the crushing abyss. Though heavily outgunned by Spanish iron, the treacherous North African topography became his deadliest weapon, transforming the ocean's jagged reefs into a suffocating swamp for gargantuan galleons. Salih weaponized an unparalleled clandestine web of phantom spies, deploying vengeful Andalusian exiles and shadow merchants to meticulously chart Spanish Armada movements and their bloated, gold-laden supply veins. The Taifa operated as a dark, camouflaged intelligence syndicate. Every returning warlord was mercilessly compelled to catalog fortified vulnerabilities into terrifying, heavily guarded grimoires deep within Algiers. Opposing this storm stood Spanish vanguard Don Juan de Vega, shielding Naples and Sicily with an imposing ironclad armada of 88 warships alongside 8,000 entrenched legionnaires. Yet Salih perceived Vega's catastrophic bleeding vulnerability. His colossal fleet was violently engineered for open ocean slaughter, rendering it utterly helpless against phantom squadrons vanishing into jagged chasms. By 1555, the bleeding heart of strategic dominion became Bejaia, a festering, jagged Spanish spear relentlessly plunged into the vulnerable flank of the Islamic naval Leviathan. Spanish dominance over this cursed stronghold guaranteed the agonizing suffocation of Algerian tactical depth, violently fracturing the Islamic maritime theater at the Mediterranean's most dangerously narrow choke point. Recognizing that abyssal supremacy hinged upon a singular crucible, Salih forged a devastating four-dimensional siege, merging crushing naval blockades, brutal land assaults, starvation, and crippling psychological terror. Northward, the infamous Rais mercilessly distracted Neapolitan war fleets with blistering incursions upon Italian shores, a blood-soaked phantom maneuver chaining Spanish reserves far from the impending massacre. Simultaneously, Rais unleashed 12 predatory war galleys into the abyss, violently severing Spanish supply veins and forging an unyielding iron blockade before the primary devastation even commenced. This dark machinery operated as a singular unified hive mind, spanning 3 terrifying armadas, ensuring impregnable tactical depth and securing shadowed sanctuary should a crushing retreat become necessary. For the impending bloodletting, he dragged over 120 diverse cannons from Istanbul, including 24 apocalyptic bombard leviathans exclusively forged to shatter unyielding Spanish stone fortifications.
Shadow spies gleefully whispered that Don Alonso de Peralta commanded merely hundreds of doomed Spanish mercenaries, hoarding tragically meager rations destined to fail against a suffocating naval strangulation.
Amidst the scorching summer of 1555, Salih Reis unleashed an apocalyptic armada of 88 warships, dragging 9,000 bloodthirsty corsairs and elite janissaries from the Algiers stronghold. He wielded the terror-inducing Ottoman Naval Crescent, forging a suffocating arc of iron that choked off salvation while indiscriminately devastating harbor defenses from 3 intersecting angles. As the Algerian Leviathan breached the cursed waters, Sinan Reis's invisible blockade had already starved the besieged garrison of Spanish relief, reducing their defenders to starving ghosts. He forged a menacing vanguard outpost near Cape Carbone, weaponizing terrifyingly shallow depths that trapped hulking Spanish galleons while transforming jagged geography into an impenetrable natural shield. Initiating the bloodbath, he unleashed 10 phantom galleys as intoxicating bait, violently luring the overconfident Spanish coastal patrols outward before dragging them eastward into a devastating trap. While desperate Spanish hounds furiously chased this spectral illusion, 8 massive Algerian siege galleys mercilessly shattered the harbor's bleeding southwestern flank, violently exposing their most fragile artery. Within 27 agonizing minutes, the Iron Crescent utterly choked the port, drowning the doomed Spanish garrison in inescapable naval isolation, while tribal warlords swarmed the bleeding highlands. Commanding apocalyptic bombardments, Salih surgically obliterated the Sea Castle and Emperor's Tower, terrifying the trembling defenders by ripping out their strategic heart while ruthlessly conserving devastating ammunition. 39 thundering bombard rounds viciously pulverized the sea fortress, ripping open a bleeding aquatic wound for Algerian assault galleys, dragging the terrified Spanish commander into begging for parley. Denying cowardly surrender, Salih unleashed psychological venom, sneering that only surrendered keys unlock salvation, deliberately shattering the garrison's broken will before initiating the final, blood-soaked, chaotic massacre. By the 10th agonizing sunrise, ferocious janissaries butchered their way through claustrophobic southern alleyways, while relentless offshore thunder ground the western ramparts into suffocating clouds of dust. Resurrecting Barbarossa's deceptive phantom retreat, he lured a doomed Spanish scouting legion outside the Emperor's gates, dragging them straight into the merciless blades of 500 hidden corsairs. This blood-soaked massacre triggered a catastrophic psychological implosion within the terrified Spanish ranks, annihilating 78 elite legionnaires within 25 agonizing minutes, signaling inescapable doom for the fortress. Across the raging sea, Rais paralyzed the Sicilian relief fleet, conjuring a terrifying phantom assault upon Trapani that paralyzed Neapolitan warships, leaving Bejaia bleeding into nothingness. During the siege's apocalyptic climax, Salih plunged his 24 vanguard galleys directly into the slaughter, unleashing 1,400 bloodthirsty janissaries to synchronize with the roaring tribal tempest ashore. Bejaia finally crumbled under the suffocating iron grip. The humiliated Spanish commander, Don Alonso, surrendered into disgrace, eventually facing a grim executioner's blade for squandering the imperial fortress. Upon breaching the shattered gates, Salih violently purged all Spanish imperial insignias, resurrecting the pulverized stonework into an invincible Islamic vanguard bastion commanding the sprawling, blood-stained Mediterranean. The Bejaia massacre proved this terrifying naval syndicate transcended conventional armadas, manifesting unparalleled 16th-century network warfare through a deadly trinity of synchronized terror, binding Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. Commanding his relentless right flank, Salih bestowed terrifying tactical autonomy, painting broad strokes of slaughter rather than micromanaging, entrusting the visceral execution to his blood-soaked genius battlefield warlords. Upon the left, he weaponized brutal asymmetrical warfare, deploying lightning-fast predatory vessels to utterly neutralize suffocating Spanish artillery, plunging into terrifyingly close-quarters naval combat where giants fall bleeding. Rejecting the agonizing trap of prolonged attrition, he engaged only in meticulously chosen massacres, willingly delaying for weeks until the tempestuous winds aligned perfectly with his lethal intentions. During his terrifying 1553 descent upon the Balearic Islands, he vomited 3,000 ironclad warriors onto Minorca, annihilating a 500-strong Spanish garrison before the sun could even set.
The Taifa operated not as a mere guild, but a dark parallel empire commanding ruthless courts and imposing blood-soaked charters written across dual languages for hundreds of warlords. This underworld syndicate forged specialized tribunals for dividing plunder, establishing grim sanctuaries for mutilated corsairs, and funding orphaned bloodlines through relentless tithes ripped from every single doomed prize. Their merciless hierarchy ticked like an iron clock. The supreme Rais, the logistical Khoja, the roaring gunmaster, the greedy Shabandar, and the brutal Comité driving chained souls below. Their brutal ascension required blood, 3 years tasting salt as sailors, 2 surviving the slaughter as combat officers, then an agonizing year mastering abyssal tactics within Algiers' fortress. An invisible intelligence web stretched from Seville to Alexandria, utilizing shadowy merchants who smuggled terrifyingly precise encrypted ciphers detailing vulnerabilities of massive gold-laden European armadas awaiting slaughter. Their dark logistics operated flawlessly. Algiers relentlessly forged iron cannons. Tunis surgically stitched shattered galleons back together, while Tripoli ruthlessly pumped fuel and gunpowder into the eastern abyss. Countless European renegades abandoned their thrones for this relentless holy war, including the infamous Portuguese turncoat Salih Reis, who masterfully wove the suffocating espionage web across Atlantic frontiers. Fueled by merciless academies, this phantom armada instantaneously regenerated lost fleets. For every galleon violently dragged down into the dark abyss, 2 terrifying new warships emerged by spring. Beyond mere plunder, these warlords hungered for immortal glory. Their blood-soaked triumphs proclaimed across roaring markets, granting the apex predators a terrifying reverence far exceeding mortal gold. Upon surviving the slaughter, triumphant armadas were greeted by grandiose Algiers ceremonies, where scholars and tycoons meticulously etched the bloody achievements of every warlord into the eternal chronicles. The apocalyptic Bejaia campaign violently ruptured the geopolitical equilibrium, tearing the bleeding heart from Spain's African ambitions and entirely securing the terrifying Algerian dominion from festering imperial threats. Crushed beneath this unrelenting oceanic dread, a humiliated Spain surrendered to an unspoken truce, violently capitulating total hegemony over the blood-soaked North African frontier to the Ottoman Leviathans. By 1556, Salih orchestrated a terrifying campaign to rip Oran from Spanish clutches, assembling a colossal legion of 12,000 warriors, shadowed by an armada of 120 warships. Yet his sudden death forced his lieutenants into a brilliant tactical withdrawal from Oran, acknowledging that starving supply veins across treacherous mountains could not sustain such apocalyptic slaughters. This chilling retreat immortalized Salih's iron doctrine: never unleash hellfire without flawless logistical perfection, scorning the reckless vanity of lesser commanders who hunger blindly for fleeting, bloody glory. Today, elite academies from Navarre to France dissect this dark corsair doctrine, studying how an irregular phantom menace utterly humiliated bloated imperial legions through terrifyingly synchronized shadow warfare tactics. Spanish chronicler Martín de Lovera lamented that Salih's terrifying system defeated them, cursing that severing one bloody limb instantly sprouted two deadlier monstrosities from the unforgiving Mediterranean abyss. His monstrous strategic genius forged an invisible iron shield across North Africa, repelling Spanish colonial devastation for an entire bloody century for fear alone, far eclipsing mortal fortresses. Following his dark demise in 1556, successors ruthlessly upheld his intricate syndicate without deviation, proving his terrifying legacy was an immortal, self-sustaining leviathan rather than fleeting mortal vanity. Across 30 blood-stained years, Salih fundamentally butchered the definition of maritime supremacy. Ultimate power wasn't monstrous ships, but the terrifying synergy of lethal speed, shadowed intelligence, and unbreakable conviction. Deep within Algiers' bleeding archives, later unveiled by 19th century scholars, the Phantom Armada orchestrated no fewer than 187 apocalyptic maritime devastations within a single terrifying decade. These brutal campaigns wove economics, politics, and slaughter into one terrifying symphony, expanding shadowed dominion while terrifying imperial adversaries, a multi-dimensional mastery exclusive to true lords of war. Salih died as he lived, a relentless conqueror of the bleeding waves, while his vanguard's iron banner cast eternal shadows over 57 shattered ports bridging Gibraltar and the Messina Strait. When fragile historians question why European colonial devastation was halted for centuries following Granada's bleeding fall, the terrifying answer remains eternal. Salih Reis, the naval vanguard that never sleeps.